If you've been listening to this show for the past few weeks, it has become pretty clear that I'm getting excited about the possibility of young defenseman Brandt Clarke being an LA King this season. But if he makes the roster, who's out? Plus, should the NHL follow the NFL's plan when it comes to preseason games? Are the Kings going to have jersey sponsors this season? Also, news on an LA King getting suspended. All that and more on a Feedback Friday on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. And apparently a lot of you are, because we are now at 676 subscribers at last check. Our goal was 600 by the end of September. We met that goal, and I asked for 700 by the end of October, and we've almost gotten to 700 before the start of October. I have no doubt we'll hit 700 by the time the regular season starts. Thank you so much for all your support and for liking and subscribing to the YouTube channel and for listening to the podcast as well. My name is Eddie Garcia. I am your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years. For the past 20 plus years, I've been at the Fox Sports Radio Network, where I'm a co-host, sidekick reporter, and NHL analyst. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. We are 11 days away from the LA Kings season opener, October 11th, against the Vegas Golden Knights at Crypto.com Arena. Can't wait to get out there and see the Kings in games that absolutely matter in the standings as we hopefully start another season of making it to the Stanley Cup playoffs. It is a Feedback Friday, and if you've been watching or listening to this show since I have been taking over the channel for over a couple of months now, usually on Fridays during the off season at least, we take time to check in on what you guys want to talk about, let you kind of control the content a little bit and answer some questions. And our first one is a question that is something that I was thinking about doing a little bit of a deep dive on myself, so it works hand in hand perfectly. This from Carlos in Whittier, and he says, "I hear you talk a lot about Brandt Clarke, and I feel like he's a star in the making. So if he makes the team this year, who will lose a roster spot because of it? Thanks for the show." Carlos, again, great question, and we're going to answer that right now, at least based on my thoughts on that. Obviously, it is a good question, and I can only speculate as to who's going to make the final roster. Educated guess, I suppose, and you guys certainly can play along as well and agree or disagree and let me know what you think. But let's break it down. The LA Kings have a 23-man roster to get to for the start of the season. Each night they will dress 18 skaters and two goalies, and 3 players will be eating popcorn in the press box. Popcornopolis, probably. So we know the 2 goalies, assuming Cal Peterson is going to start the season and he's healthy. It'll be Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson. So there's 2 of your roster spots. The top line most likely will be Anze Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, and Kevin Fiala, not the triple K line. That's 5. Second line most likely going to be Philip Deneau, Trevor Moore, and either a healthy Victor Arvidsson, or let's say most likely a replacement for the start of the season. And we're going to say that's going to be Gabe Vilardi for now. So that's 8. Third line, most likely going to be Quentin Byfield, Arthur Kaliev, and Alex Iafallo. That's 11. Fourth line, I think most likely will be Blake Lizotte, Carl Grundstrom, and Brendan Lemieux. That's 14. On defense, your top pairing is going to be Drew Doughty and Mikey Anderson. That's 16. Second pairing, I'm going to say if Brandt Clarke makes the team, that it'll be Sean Walker and Matt Roy as the second pairing on defense. So that's 18. And the third pairing, I think, would be Sean Durzi and Brandt Clarke. That's 20. I know that we have a lot of right defensemen, and somebody's going to have to play on the left side. We have some left defensemen, Mikey Anderson, Tobias Bjornfoot, Alex Edler. Sean Walker has played on the left side, even though he's a right shot, so he's going to play on his offside. He's done that before. And if we have Sean Durzi and Brandt Clarke, one of those guys is going to have to play on his offside as well. It's just It's just the way it's going to have to work out. If you feel like Brandt Clarke is good enough to make this team, that's just what's going to have to happen. So with Dursey and Clarke as the third pairing, that is 20 of the 23-man roster. So we've got 3 players on the bench. I believe one of them will be veteran defenseman Alex Edler. So who are the 2 forwards that are going to be left over? Now, once Victor Arvidsson comes back, then one of those spots would be Gabe Vilardi. So there's 1 forward spot left to be filled. And frankly, you're talking about somebody like Elias Anderson, maybe a Jarrett Anderson-Dolan. Both those guys are not waiver eligible. So if they are sent down to the AHL, they would have to pass through waivers and they would be available to be picked up by other teams. I've said this before, with all due respect. I think that Elias Anderson is a guy that if somebody wanted to take him, okay. As far as I'm concerned, maybe you feel differently. Jarrett Anderson-Dolan, I think, is a guy that the Kings would not like to expose to waivers. So he would probably be the other forward. As I understand it, here's the list of players that the Kings can pass through waivers without exposing them to other teams. And these are players that are still working on their entry-level contracts. Quentin Byfield and Arthur Kaliyev will be on that list, but they're not going anywhere, obviously. So you've got Rasmus Kupari and a couple of defensemen, Tobias Bjornfoot and Jordan Spence. Guys who are no longer on entry-level contracts and would have to be exposed to waivers to go down to the AHL would be Alex Edler, Elias Anderson, Jarrett Anderson-Dolan, and Gabe Vilardi. So Samuel Fagemo is another guy that can be sent down and is working on an entry-level contract as well. So that one final forward spot, again, I think that it would probably go to Jarrett Anderson-Dolan, but that's my guess at this point. It could be Elias Anderson, but I don't think so. So that would be the list. So the answer to the question from Carlos was, who's the odd man out? And to me, it's Tobias Bjornfoot because, like I said, he can go down to the AHL without being passed through waivers. I think he would be claimed if he were someone that was exposed to waivers, but that's not something that's a consideration. So I think if Brandt Clarke makes the team, that Tobias Bjornfoot would be the odd man out. Now, Tobias Bjornfoot is a good young defenseman, more defensively oriented. He doesn't have the offensive game that Brandt Clarke has, and judging by the games I've seen with Brandt Clarke, I don't think he's a liability defensively. I don't know that Tobias Bjornfoot is that much better of a player defensively that it would warrant him getting a roster spot over a guy like Brandt Clarke. Now, the one thing that Bjornfoot has going for him, as I mentioned, he is a left shot and he would be playing on the left side. And all things being equal, you would prefer to have that. But all things aren't equal, to me anyway. I think Brandt Clarke's abilities are so much greater than what Tobias Bjornfoot offers that it's worth somebody playing on their offside. I don't know who it would be. Would there be an adjustment period? Sure. But that's how I would see it. Maybe the Kings would decide to go with Alex Edler and Brandt Clarke and have Sean Dursey be kind of the odd man out. Or maybe it would be kind of a rotation of Dursey and Clarke kind of getting Brandt Clarke acclimated to the NHL. I'll be honest with you. I would send Alex Edler through waivers, hoping somebody would claim him. They're not going to do that. I know they're not going to do that. Alex Edler is a veteran guy, respected, and they wouldn't do that to him. I'm just saying, me, cold-blooded Eddie Garcia, who only cares about what's best for the team and doesn't have any sentiment or anything invested in it. I would do that. Alex Edler looks so slow in the preseason. It just stands out. But look, to give him the benefit of the doubt, he's a war horse. He's seen it. I think they would like to have with a fairly a fairly young defensive core, probably another veteran back there in case you need, in case of emergency break glass. But so I think Tobias Bjornfoot would be the odd man out if Brandt Clarke makes the NHL roster. So do you agree or disagree? Do you have any thoughts on that? You can always send me an email. It's lockedoneddie@gmail.com. But that's how I see it. That's what I think would be how it would work out if Brandt Clarke does, in fact, make the NHL roster, which it appears to be, to me, more and more likely that will be the case. Do you agree with that? Do you think Brandt Clarke should make the NHL roster this season, or is it worth it to make him wait another year before that entry-level contract kicks in, and he would be under team control for 3 more years after this year because you think the Kings' better days are ahead of them, so to speak? it's an interesting argument, and that's certainly what Rob Blake and the management of the LA Kings are certainly considering. But I think the Kings believe that they're good enough right now to be a Stanley Cup contender, certainly not a favorite, but a contender, and that they're better with Brandt Clarke than without him. So we'll see how it goes. Should the NHL cut back on the number of preseason games? Also, will the NHL have ad jerseys this season? Yes. Are the LA Kings going to be one of them? We will answer those questions in a second. But first, I need to tell you about betonline.net being your number one source for football betting this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to get all of your your betting needs out there. Your favorite games and events are also on betonline.net, including baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, our next email comes from Phil in San Diego, and he says, I know you have mentioned after some of the preseason games that one of the best things that happened is that no one got hurt. In football, they have cut the number of preseason games, and in some cases, key players are held out of the preseason entirely. Do you see this eventually happening in the NHL since, like football, it is a contact sport? Good question, Phil. And ironically, I just had a discussion about this subject with my co-host over at the Puck Podcast, Doug Stolhand, who is a Ducks fan. And he was saying that the NHL needs to get rid of the preseason, that the risk of injury to players is too great in what are basically meaningless games, and they need to do away with it. I did not agree with that. I thought that there was still value in preseason games to evaluate players, and you need to see them in live action. That there's, you can do an evaluation process in training camp and scrimmages, but there's nothing like live bullets flying against other competition. So I still think there is value in the preseason. However, right after we had that discussion, you may have heard the news that young Ducks star and rising NHL star Trevor Zegras was hurt in a preseason game. He took a big hit. I can't remember who the team was, but he got shaken up pretty good. And it was one of those things where the camera angle was from on high and you couldn't really tell if it was a dirty hit or not. I don't think it was penalized. The player who hit him did kind of follow through with his elbow, so it did look like his elbow was up after he came through with the hit. But difficult to tell, frankly, from that one angle whether it was a dirty play or not. But regardless, Zegras got shaken up and probably is not going to play again this preseason, and we'll see about an injury for him going forward. But if you follow the NFL, you know that they cut one of the preseason games. It used to be 4, now it's 3. And in some cases, like I know, for example, my wife is a diehard Los Angeles Chargers fan. Their star quarterback, Justin Herbert, did not take one single snap during the preseason. And there's a lot of other quarterbacks and other key players as well in the NFL that don't play a second of the preseason. So do I see this potentially happening in the NHL? It's possible. The NHL isn't quite as much of a contact sport as the NFL. I mean, they're literally hitting on every play in the NFL. Guys are slamming into each other. So I get the risk of injury there is a little bit greater. But there are also people of the opinion in the NFL that the quality of the product early in the season isn't as good because the teams aren't hitting, because key players aren't participating in preseason games. So there's certainly an argument to be had on either side of it. The more we see incidences like what happened with Trevor Zegras, the more the people on that side of things are going to have, evidence in their favor, because that's easy to point to. It's easy to say, look what happened to this guy in this meaningless game. This is ridiculous. It's a little bit more hard to submit evidence to say, hey, oh, look at how this guy is playing and look at the quality of play early on because we had preseason games. It's a little bit more difficult to point a finger to, but I still think there's value in preseason games. I wouldn't be disappointed or surprised if the NHL eventually cuts back. I believe it's 7 or 8 preseason games, depending on the team. The Kings, I believe, are playing 7 preseason games. It's 3 against the Ducks, 2 against the Sharks, and 2 against the Golden Knights. 3, 4, 5, that's 7. So if they cut it back to like 4 or 5, maybe I wouldn't have a complaint with that. But I don't know. I still think there's value in preseason games. I don't see it being eliminated or anything like that. But maybe they do cut back a little bit on it. And again, if there's injuries to star players, then the cry will go up that we need to get rid of the preseason. Our next email comes from Stacy in Ontario. Hello, Eddie. Thank you for all of the work you do putting out the show every day. I saw that some NHL teams are having ads on their jerseys this year. Are the Kings having ads on their jerseys? And if so, what is it? Just curious. Good question, Stacy. And I don't have an answer for you. As far as I know, the Kings at this point have not sold sponsorship on their jerseys. If you're unaware, by the way, this is the first season the NHL has approved teams selling sponsorship on the jerseys. There's a certain area of the jersey, kind of, I think it's on above like kind of the right chest area where they can sell a small ad. We saw a couple years ago the NHL started putting sponsorship on helmets, and so now they're going the way of the jerseys. This is following in the footsteps of the NBA, which did this, I think, a couple of seasons ago. Major League Baseball, for the first time, had a Nike swoosh on all of their jerseys, as Nike was their sponsor. That's the first time baseball's ever done anything like that. And they're going to go to it. I have no doubt in the future. And I have no doubt the NFL will do something like this as well in the near future. So I don't know what the LA Kings have planned for this. I would assume they would do this in the near future. I don't know why they wouldn't, frankly. If everyone else is getting money out of this, why wouldn't they? They have had the ads on the helmets. I can't remember who it was last year for the life of me, but yeah, the most amusing one I've seen so far, and I think a little less than half of the NHL teams so far have announced they are going to have sponsorship on the jerseys. There've been a couple of I know we talk about BetOnline.net. There's a couple of gambling websites that are on jerseys. Vegas has one, which makes sense. The Washington Capitals also have that on their jersey. The most amusing one I saw was the Toronto Maple Leafs have on their jersey the word milk. That's it, just milk. They're being sponsored by like the Ontario Dairy Farmers or something like that. And so it's just milk on the front of the jersey for the Maple Leafs. So hopefully whatever it is, it's not too silly. I know didn't the Lakers have like a ramen company or something? Some of them seem very random. Some of them are brand names you all know and love, and some of them are like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. So anyway, I have not heard that the Kings are going to have jersey sponsorship this year. When we hear word, we'll certainly pass it along to you guys. Quinn in Glendale says, you mentioned on a recent show that Adrian Kempe and Kevin Fiala didn't play growing up in Sweden. However, Fiala is not Swedish. He is from Switzerland. That is accurate. If I said that Kevin Fiala is from Sweden, then that was a mistake. He is, in fact, as you pointed out, not from Sweden. He is from Switzerland. However, Kevin Fiala did play hockey growing up in Sweden, and he played against Adrian Kempe for a couple of years. They both played 2 years in the Swedish Elite League, and both of their seasons over there did overlap. Kempe played for Modo, and Fiala played for HV71. So they did play against each other, but they have not played with each other, even though Fiala is from Switzerland. He did play a couple of seasons in Sweden. And that was a question asked to Adrian Kempe after the first day of training camp, if he had ever played with Kevin Fiala before, because they're on a line together now. And he said, no, I've played against him though. So that's where that quote came from. So apologies if I maybe inadvertently said Kevin Fiala is from Sweden. He has played in Sweden, but he is in fact from Switzerland, as has been pointed out. Our next email comes from Steve. He is from parts unknown. He did not include where he's from. And so I will make up a location for him. And I'm a fan of alliteration, so I'm going to say it's Steve in Seal Beach. Steve says, I'm annoyed not to be able to watch games in this day and age too. But as I understand it, just like blackout issues, it's not the Kings' fault. They aren't allowed to stream games once preseason starts. The regional broadcaster, Bally Sports, has broadcast rights. And if they don't do it, we are SOL. Stuff out of luck, I believe is that what that stands for. He says, maybe I'm wrong and the Kings could tell Bally to do it, but that's my understanding. Steve, that would not surprise me, although that is still equally annoying. The blackout rules and the exclusive rights rules, I get it. But at the same time, if Bally says, hey, we're not going to broadcast these games because we've got an Angels game that night, or for whatever reason, maybe they just don't want to spend the money to do it, then the Kings should be allowed to just stream a camera and show the action to their fans. Maybe that's in the contract. You could be right. I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case. But it seems to me if that's the case, then I get it. But I like I said, in this day and age that we can't stream a game with a camera, like a single camera is all we're asking for, something just so we can see what's going on. Um, certainly is something that should be done, I think. Uh, what websites and Twitter accounts do I follow to stay up to date on NHL news and player information? We will let you know about that in a second. But first, don't forget that Locked On NHL podcast has you covered for all your league-wide NHL talk with a rotating cast of local hosts from the Locked On NHL channel, breaking down the biggest stories in hockey 5 days a week. Subscribe for free on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. Our next email is from John in Bakersfield. He says, with the season approaching, do you recommend any websites do you use to keep up on stats or players, or where do you find information on players, etc.? Thanks for the show. Good question. I would recommend, if you're interested in anything involving the salary cap, and I know some of you like, I don't care anything at all about that, and others of you are very interested in that. I've mentioned this website before. It is used by everyone pretty much in the NHL media. Capfriendly.com. Great website that keeps you up to date on everything going on with all the teams in the league. And you can look at teams individually like the Kings, and you can go there and find out exactly who is signed for how long, for how much, what's the average annual cap hit, so on and so forth. It's more interesting to look at, I guess, going forward into the offseason as far as who the Kings might sign or need to re-sign or whatever. So that's a great website. The hockey database, which is HockeyDB or hockeyreference.com, are a couple of great websites if you need any player stats at all. The hockey database actually includes minor league stats as well, and wherever basically a player has played, junior stats, overseas stats, they're all included in the player's like career bio page, which is awesome. The hockey reference page is just NHL, I believe. There's a website called Quant Hockey. It's QUANT hockey.com. It's a really cool site if you ever want to look up specific statistics over a certain period of time or involving players of a certain position. Just for example, if you for whatever reason, if you were curious who's the top scoring defenseman from 2015 to 2020, you could find that information, type it in, and it'll spit out the information for you. So it's a very specific kind of website for I guess certain information over a certain period of time involving certain teams or certain positions. And it's a little bit difficult to navigate at first, but once you figure it out, it's a really interesting tool to use if you're into that kind of thing. A website I like to go to for NHL news is dailyfaceoff.com. You've got all your usuals, TSN, Sportsnet, ESPN. But that's a hockey specific website that I like to use for hockey news, dailyfaceoff.com. And I will admit, I do have a relationship with Matt Larkin, who is one of the senior writers and editors over there. But they do good work, and it's a pretty new site if you want to check that out. As far as Twitter goes, I would recommend Puck Report NHL. At Puck Report NHL. It's basically a Twitter account that I assume is, subscribes to all the major hockey writers, all the NHL teams, all the major news sites. And basically, this guy gets notifications on all the news, and then he just retweets it. So it's a great place to go to just to kind of scroll through and easily find what are the NHL headlines for that day if you're interested in something like that. And so anyway, those are a few websites and a Twitter account that I follow to kind of keep up to date on what's going on with the NHL. Obviously, Kings specific, LAKings.com. You got the LA Kings Insider, Zach Dooley over there, who does a great job as well. Next email comes from John in Hermosa Beach. He says, I heard you say that you played hockey. I was just curious where you play. I play at Toyota Sports Center. I didn't grow up with the game, but playing hockey has really it's really helped me enjoy the sport so much more and helped me to appreciate how hard it is for NHL players to do what they do. I've been playing beer league hockey for, 15 years. Maybe even approaching 20 years. I started playing when I moved here to LA, and I just fell in love with it. It's so much fun. And it is expensive, but if you have any athletic ability and want to understand the sport of hockey more, I strongly recommend playing in a beer league. There are various levels for people who are beginners, and it's not only is it a ton of fun and you get good exercise, but you really do, as John said, you appreciate what these guys do at the NHL level. It is so amazing. It's a difficult sport to play, but it is so much fun. I've never had more fun than playing the sport of hockey. And like I said, yeah, you understand it more when you play it a little bit, even at the lower levels, and certainly your appreciation is a lot greater as well. Hey, thanks to everybody who emailed this week. If you'd like to shoot me an email for next week's show or at any time, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Before we get out of here, there was a news item involving the LA Kings. LA Kings forward Jacob Doty was suspended 2 games by the NHL for his interference penalty on the Sharks' Jeffrey Fiala. That happened in the preseason game on Wednesday. He took a run at the guy and nailed him, and he didn't have the puck. So it was a pretty, frankly, obvious penalty to call, and I'm not surprised he got suspended. Jacob Doty is probably the most physical player in the LA Kings organization, and he certainly showed it in that game, knocking out a couple of panes of glass as well. But yeah, that hit was over the line, and he got hit with a 2-game suspension. Don't forget the LA Kings play their next preseason game at Crypto.com Arena. It's coming up on Sunday against the Anaheim Ducks. It is going to be televised locally on Bally Sportsnet, so you can watch it. I believe it's a 6 p.m. face-off local time, and we'll, of course, have a full recap of that game on Monday's show. Speaking of Bally Sportsnet, I'm excited to announce that we have scheduled longtime Kings TV analyst Jim Fox to join us on this show the day before the Kings season opener against the Vegas Golden Knights. So on our October 10th show, Jim Fox will be our special guest. Really looking excited to get Jim's thoughts on the LA Kings this upcoming season. I also want to invite you to follow us on Twitter. We are at Locked On LA Kings. There's also an Instagram page, which is at Locked On LA Kings as well. Hey, thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On Experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast of all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to talking to you on Monday about that Kings Ducks preseason game. Until then, I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for watching Locked On LA Kings. And as always, we close out the show by saying, have a good weekend, and also go Kings go.